Hey, Kat, I'm so happy that you're with us tonight. It's night for me and day for you. Just introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about what you do.
It's always a loaded question. My name is Kat Courtney. I also go by the moniker the Afterlife Coach, which I think kind of says a lot about what I do. I'm classically trained in indigenous lineages, working with ayahuasca and Huachumera, which saved my life. Ayahuasca did, and Huachumera keeps improving it every time I work with him. So I'm deeply connected to plant consciousness. And I also am certified as a death doula, hence the afterlife kind of emphasis. I like to treat death as a ceremony, bringing back sacredness and a relationship of trust with our transition into the unknown, which is really what working with plant medicines is all about too, going into the unknown. So maybe that's how I should describe what I do. I work with the unknown and celebrating that in the space of a ceremony.
Okay, all right. So to start, in a short summary for someone who's never heard of it, what is ayahuasca?
Well, technically speaking, a tea made of two plants, ayahuasca vine, which is an MAOI, and usually chacruna or another plant that has high concentration of DMT, which is a substance that we as humans have in our bodies and our pineal glands. And when it's released, we go into basically an out-of-body experience. So ayahuasca is a very strong psychotropic medicine, and it's been used traditionally for thousands of years as a mode of healing and as a tool for expansion, for us to remember who we are beyond the smallness of our egos, to connect with nature, to reawaken to the magic of life. So, I mean, to try to describe her is, and I say her because it's a very female consciousness, right, is really challenging, because I've been working with her for 20 years. And every time I get to connect with her again, it's like there's a new element to her. She seems limitless in the consciousness that she carries, but that's the best way I can describe how she's worked with, what she offers to us.
Okay. And tell us about where you were at in your life, what was going on when you found your way to her.
Yeah. Well, on the outside, life was good. I had an amazing job, a famous boyfriend, like all of these things, but I had attempted suicide a handful of years prior. I was bulimic, functioning alcoholic, just really lost. And because my life on the outside looked pretty amazing, it made it even more painful, the fact that I wasn't enjoying it and that I was actually passively self-destructing. So my then boyfriend said the word ayahuasca. I'd never heard of her before, but I was like, sure, let's go to the jungle and have an adventure. I had no idea what I was in for. But as soon as I got to the jungle, I was confronted with my lack of self-love. I would call it then total self-hatred. And that's when I knew there was something about this medicine that was going to bring this to the surface. But if I had to whittle down the core issue I was dealing with, it was a lack of self-love.
Okay. If someone came to you and said that they were interested in attending a ceremony, they'd heard about it and they didn't know much, and they wanted to know if it would be a good fit for them, what kind of questions would you ask them first?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that we kind of pre-screen people, but the first place that I go to is to make sure that it's a calling and not, well, my sister did it or my friend thinks I should do it. Because there's something really interesting about the spirit of the plant that she calls us as much as we want to work with her. I look at that across the board with plant consciousness, that we want to have permission, that we want them to want to work with us too, and not just impose that. So that's the first step. Then assessing physically whether our bodies are ready. And the easiest way to determine that is, would you get on a high impact, intense roller coaster? Are you physically healthy enough to handle a crazy roller coaster ride? Because that's what it feels like to work with her. So if you have heart issues, Crohn's disease, things like that, that would make that kind of experience unpleasant, to put it lightly, physically speaking, you're not ready to work with her. And then from an emotional or a mental perspective, this is where it gets kind of controversial, because I mentioned I was diagnosed bipolar. A lot of centers, a lot of circles won't take people with that diagnosis because there's a perception of instability. And yet this is the process by which I healed that diagnosis. So I am much more, I guess, spacious and lenient with the past histories of being labeled these things, because I know the medicine can help heal that. It's just when people have a history of depression and anxiety and things like that, they cannot be on SSRIs or MAOIs. You can't be taking antipsychotic medications, things like that, because it creates a dangerous combination with ayahuasca. It could cause serotonin syndrome, which is potentially deadly, rarely, but potentially. So we can't have any of those medications, but if people have a history of those diagnoses and they're willing to wean off the pharmaceutical meds, they are welcome in many circles. And typically we titrate. We start with small amounts of Aya to see how it works with their constitution. But it depends on the circle, the facilitators, their comfort level of working with people that have had past issues with emotional, mental, challenges.
Okay. And you said facilitators, and we hear all these terms tossed around like shaman, facilitator, ayahuasquera. Can you just say something about what those would mean? And also, what important questions would a potential participant ask of the guide to see if it's a safe
Great
place
question.
to go?
Yeah. And so I so love this question, because whether you're sitting for the first time or the 100th time, having discernment and being really curious about the expertise and the experience and the history of the people that you choose to sit with is really important, because there's a lot of people that don't have the trusted experiences that are pouring medicine. And we as participants have to ask the right questions. So first of all, your question around difference between a shaman and ayahuasquera facilitator. Practitioner, facilitator, I typically use language to describe people that are experienced with the medicine, but not necessarily trained in an indigenous teaching. However, I am trained in Shipibo Kanibo tradition, but I'm a white girl. And so calling myself shaman feels sacrilegious, like it's just, there's a sensitivity with that. Shaman is a really, really sacred title. The indigenous maestro that I work with, he's a shaman, like it's in his blood. I call myself an ayahuasquera because it's really straight to the point. I work with ayahuasca. I'm a woman who works with ayahuasca, which sort of breaks down the barriers. But there's a lot of interplay with that language that, there isn't a strict definition with any of them. I'm always suspect of people who call themselves shaman. No, because there is such a sacredness to that title. And there's just a lot of people right now that have drank the medicine a few times and they're like, I'm a shaman. I'm like, do you even know what that means? So to the second part of your question, what to ask? I mean, the core things are, what was their training? How long have they been working with the medicine? And not just how long, but how many times. They could say a year, but if they've drank 3 times, for me, when I apprenticed, a minimum of 7 years was the commitment, because it's very much like a medical degree and an internship. It's like, it's going to take a long time to learn how to work with these energies. And so when I agreed with my teacher, he's like, you got to give me 7 years minimum. And it took me 10 years before I poured a single cup of medicine to apprentice. So you want to make sure that the person you're sitting with has paid their dues. And in an experiential setting, not just there's all these courses online now to become a shaman, which is like, what? You can't learn these things from a book. You got to be, or from an online course, you got to be in the experience of these medicines hundreds of times before I consider somebody safe, adept of working with the intensity. So you want to ask their history. You also want to ask what's in the medicine, because there's a lot of people putting different things because different plants make it stronger, and there's no need to add anything to the brew of ayahuasca and chacruna. Like, that's plenty, but people can't help themselves. They start throwing in other potent plants as experiments, and it's not safe. So, and the other thing is, make sure that they're not just buying things off the internet. and making something at home like that, it's sacrilegious. It's not engaging in reciprocity for the plants. And B, every touch point that the plants have in their route to us absorbs energy. It matters. So you want them to know who harvested the plants. Are they putting plants back in the ground? Who's the brewmaster? We have 2 points of contact to get to our medicine. We know exactly the journey it takes from the point that the plants are taken out of the ground to us. And super important because you can feel the vibration of that. And then beyond that too, in vetting potential places to sit, you want to make sure there's also other guardians, we call them, assistants that are there for things like helping get people to the bathroom, like the simple things that are a very big deal when you're deep in the portal of the medicine and you need help. You don't want it just to be one shaman leading because they can't do everything. They can't hold the space for the entire group and do one-on-one work. So there should be a team of people. There should be clear protocol around the diet to prepare. There should be integration support, which a lot of places don't have right now. And that's the most important part of what happens in the aftermath. So if they don't have integration support, have somebody that you find and trust to be there if you need it. Not all of us need integration after each experience, but it's important to already have that foundation if you do need it, because it can be really sensitive in the aftermath. Those are the core things. I could go on and on about other nuances, but the training, what's in the medicine, and the support in preparation and integration.
Okay. Some people come to ceremony and, they've heard stories of all these beautiful visionary experiences, and they come and it's actually a really dark time, even say 2 ceremonies in a row. And then afterwards, they feel really confused and maybe like they weren't even the right fit for the medicine. Maybe they made the wrong decision. When people come with these kind of experiences, what are some main things that you say to them, or how to kind of start helping them to understand a bit about these harder experiences?
What you're describing is what I sometimes call journey envy. Like you could be sitting next to somebody that's clearly in lollipop and rainbow land and you're in hell and you're like, did we drink the same thing? And yet medicine, this is kind of the nature of how she works. She doesn't have any opinions on whether the darkness or the light is better or worse. This is one of the core teachings that ayahuasca has, is that it's all aspect of consciousness. It's all available. So if we're resisting the dark side, let's just call it, oftentimes she'll take us there again and again and again to form a relationship of trust and understanding. So I'll say to people, you're not being punished. You're not being tortured. It isn't because something's wrong with you or you're broken. It's just your turn to experience these energies. And we all have a turn, many turns in the progressions of our soul, many, so it's not personal. And that really helps to normalize it, right? Of like, it's just available. And so it's our time to get to know those energies. And then there's lots of tools that I offer of how to work with the darkness and create that relationship of trust. Really simple things like smile instead of going down into contraction or fetal position and like saying, oh my God, I hate this. It's like, sit up, smile, say, bring it on. I asked for this. I've got this. Like coaching ourselves through the experience. There's all kinds of things we can do that at least lessens the resistance that we have to the darkness. And they're deceptively simple. And at the same time, they're so powerful. And that's part of what ayahuasca teaches us too, how powerful we all are to handle and navigate these spaces. We're not victims, but it can seem that way when it's indescribable, when you're, face to face with those visions or energies. And yet it's kind of like a rite of passage instead of something that's showing that we're broken or something's wrong.
I like that. One reason why I personally return to this work is seeing the resilience of some of the maestros, people who have been working with this over years and years and years. They seem to have a bit more resilience than some of us to the turbulence. And so I longed to start developing a little bit more of that. Whether a person is going to ceremony or they're just moving through, say, a dark night of the soul, do you have any tips on the development of resilience to very negative emotions?
Such a good word, finding how resilient we are. You know, the first thing that comes in when we talk about resilience is a relationship with the elements of water. So in shamanism, we often break down core shamanism into the elements. And water finds the path of least resistance, but it's a force, right? Like rocks succumb to water over time, or sometimes quickly if it's a big old deluge. So finding where we're rigid, finding the parts of our lives where we're really contracting, and literally asking water, I've got my water bottle right here, to consciously help us erode and expand. You know, it's such a simple thing. Most of us drink water really unconsciously, but you can ask for water to help with connecting more deeply to resilience and fluidity. Beyond that, it's back to the relationship of trust with these things. If we really know inherently that it is a rite of passage, one of the expressions ayahuasca uses is that when we're facing the darkness, we're in ninja school. We're learning how to work with that energy. And when you go to martial arts, you don't like step up and like face the sensei right away. Like there's steps of practicing how to work with these energies and leaning in and being curious, asking yourself, what can I do differently that will lessen the suffering of the dark night, whether it's in a psychedelic state or life happening? Because the rigidity, the lack of resilience comes from resistance. We're resisting it. So the very easy answer, and it's easy to say and hard to do, is to lean in. Now, usually we're resisting because we're scared. And the antidote to fear is curiosity. Of like, what's really happening here? What am I reacting to? What is hurting me? What can I do to support myself through this suffering? And it's going to be a different answer for all of us, but having that ability to be curious and to work with the darkness rather than just be like, get it out, get this away, because that doesn't work. That perpetuates our suffering. So that's the thing not to do.
Okay. Can you share any stories with us, either from your life or from a participant's life, where they did go into a really dark place, but they did come out with some real treasures eventually?
I mean, I can share personal stories because I'm the girl that's had journey envy many times over of like, when do I get lollipops and rainbows? Because I recognize that as a soul, I came here to crack this code with the relationship with the darkness. So I'm calling it in. And that piece right there, recognizing that this is soulful. I love that word, soulful, because it indicates deep. When we say dark night, we say it's of the soul, not of the ego or the spirit. It's the soul who's saying, bring it on, because the soul knows that that darkness is what expands and teaches. Not just the darkness, we can learn through the light too. So I've had so many dark nights with ayahuasca, dark nights in the context of my life. Healing bulimia is probably something that is most poignant in my story with this, because it took me 4 years of thinking I had gotten past it, healing not only the relationship with my body, but that aspect of control that bulimia represents, and the deep programming that all women encounter around feeling like we need to fit the ideal and feeling out of control with that. And so eating disorders in some ways represent our relationship with control and also our bodies. And man, I mean, I would get to a place where I'd stop purging and I'm like, yeah, I'm healed. And then something would happen in my life and I'd go right back to this old familiar friend, bulimia, which made me feel like I was in control of my life. And so it took 4 years of really intense work with ayahuasca before I came out the other side, and I haven't purged in a very long time. I'll still get the urge sometimes because things are difficult, but I know how to work with the relationship with my body differently of like, no, I'm not going to do that to you. like, and connecting with her and communicating on that level. But yeah, that healing is hard. It's like we got to feel the symptoms of the dis-ease, right? So it looks similar to being sick, but trusting that and going through the detox, if you will, the suffering as we're coming out, releasing, coming out the other side. But bulimia was probably one of the hardest things that I have gone through in terms of a dark night, which was a long, dark night.
Okay. You talked about bulimia and obviously any tough, stuck issue coming around and around. And I heard people say the term spiral of healing. What would you say to someone who many, many years later is still getting triggered by the same thing, even though they've been carefully working through their healing and they're just feeling really like weak? And
I would say, first of all, be in on the lies that the darkness tells us. Number one, the darkness tells us that it's permanent. So if we're dealing with something like bulimia, addiction, dysfunctional relationships, you name it, I deeply resonate with the spiral perspective, because the spiral shows us that while we are evolving, we come back around to patterns and behaviors with a new level of consciousness, but sometimes it doesn't feel that way. And so being in on that lie that the darkness tells us is you're not going backwards. It is not permanent. And the second lie that the darkness tells us is that we're going through what we're going through because it's our fault, because we're broken. We did something wrong. And that's why I like to normalize it and call it a rite of passage, whatever flavor of the darkness that we're working with, because it's happening to shape us and to expand us, not to torture us. So if we can be in on those lies and not fall for them and know that, okay, you expanded your consciousness, like me and my journey with bulimia, and then I'd relapse. I'm like, well, I have new tools and awarenesses to work with now. Yes, it feels like same, but it is different. And to highlight that, which we have to consciously lean into, there's something different here. I do have a different level of consciousness and how to deal with it. And it takes what it takes for all of us to heal these things. These are deeply embedded. These pains did not sprout overnight. They happened from deep programming. So it takes unraveling that, and it takes time before we're free of those behaviors. It's not a light switch.
what would you tell people who have lost a family member to death and they would like to somehow reconnect with that family member on the other side, and they're curious if ayahuasca is a good idea for that sort of thing?
So yes, it's possible. But ayahuasca, the language we use for her is that she heals in order of priority. So if we go into a ceremony going, I want to connect with my grandma, I'm ready. And ayahuasca comes in and goes, yeah, but you're bulimic and you're depressed and you've got all these things in your field, which is probably the reason why you can't feel the presence of your loved ones anyway. So she'll go for that. And then you'll come out of it thinking, that wasn't my intention. And yet it's related, because we all are psychic. We're all connected energetically. Our traumas, our lack of self-worth are the blocks that prevent that. That's not to say that it doesn't magically happen sometimes in ceremony where, I mean, I have a deeper relationship with my dad, who died 13 years ago, than I ever did when he was alive, because I connected with him so much in the ayahuasca space. But I had to do a deep level of my own personal healing to get to a place where I could connect with him. And of course, I can connect with him when I'm not in ayahuasca too. So yes, it's possible, but we can't be attached to what comes in the ceremonies, because she's working with our souls and she knows what we need. Our conscious minds often don't. They're not necessarily aligned with what the next important step is in our trajectory. So yeah, it's possible, not guaranteed.
Okay. Now, when we talk about ayahuasca, we often say she. And I know that you've had a lot of experience with other plant medicines and psychedelics besides ayahuasca. What is it that calls you back to her?
First of all, a soul calling. Like, I have just a relationship with her that even when it's been, I tried to leave her a couple of times and it ended up being timeouts because I just came back because there's this calling I was talking about earlier. I have such unconditional love for her and I've gone through hell with her, but I also recognize it isn't her torturing me, it's her helping me. So I come back because the relationship is just indelible. And because I trust her to tell me the truth and to have my highest good in her intention always, which is really hard to trust in other people because we have these dicey egos and we're shadowy and difficult and traumatized. Ayahuasca is just pure consciousness. And that trust I have in her keeps me coming back and probably always will. And I think I've worked with her for many, many lifetimes too. It feels like an ancient relationship. And so even if I try to get away with it or get away from her, it doesn't work.
Okay. From your journeys out of body, have you received any insights on the role of our domesticated dogs, cats, or even animals in general, as far as like their reason, who they are outside of the physical? What can you share on that?
So there was a ceremony I did in the Amazon jungle many years ago. And the morning after it, I was sitting in the hammock along the river and I was watching the logging boats going by and the decimation that they were doing of the river, of the, not just the plants, right? It impacts the animals and everything. And I could still feel ayahuasca. And so I asked her, why do plants, animal spirits, whatnot, our beautiful pets that show us unconditional love, why are they so invested in helping human consciousness when this is what we're doing? And she answered without missing a beat. She's like, because you're doing what you're supposed to do as humans, coming in with shadows and egos. You guys are doing the hard work of making what is unconscious conscious. Animals and plants are in unity consciousness. They're interconnected. They know everything's okay. We don't. We're in separateness. We're experiencing suffering on a level that they don't. So she gave me that insight and really chastised me around punishing us humans for doing these ugly things. Because she's like, you came to do those things as much as you came to do light things. It's all available, as we were talking about consciousness. So it turns out the plants and animals are aware of this intrinsically, that human beings have the hard job. And so they love us and they support us. Not all of them across the board, but a lot of them in a spiritual sense are our greatest allies because they're on team human, also because we're the ones that have the control around what's going to happen with the planet long term. Because either we continue the way we have been, treating her like trash, and she's just going to flick us off and be like, and I've had it, or we evolve and we get in right relationship and the animals and the plants all benefit from that. So there might be a little selfishness in their motivation too, of can't we all just live in harmony? And we're the ones that have the control around that. So they're supporting us in that space of healing and awakening so that we can have more of a utopia, because it's possible, but we're not in it now.
Right. One more ceremony question. People always think about the ayahuasca tea that we drink, and not always, especially before going in, not always aware of the importance and the role of the songs, the icaros, that are sung or should probably be sung in a traditional ceremony. What would you like to share with people about those?
Oh my goodness. The songs are they're the technology that drives the energy of the medicine. And as you said, they're called icaros. In all of the shamanic traditions that have developed in the Amazon region, Shipibo Canibo and Mestizo, and like tons of them, they all work with the power of song and vibration. And it's amazing because most of us don't speak Quechua or Shipibo, the languages that these songs are sung in. But yet when you're in the ceremony, you can feel the vibration of the song that's coming in. Like, for example, there are songs that are about purging and releasing or crying. And when those songs hit and the energy comes around the circle, people respond, purging, crying, releasing. And again, it's not that they mentally understand what's being said, they feel it. And so the songs are so powerful, and the shamans believe there's a dimension where those songs come from, and they are essentially in the language of the plants themselves that we channel with the language that we know how to speak, but it's the vibration that matters more than the actual translation of the songs. And some of the songs, the icaros, they're thousands of years old, and you can feel the powerful imprint of the millions of times they've been sung in ceremony, and each time getting a little bit more potent and a little more potent. They're amazing. It's one of my favorite things, the honor of getting to sing them and to watch what they do in the space. It's not me. I'm channeling, bringing in that song and putting it into the space with the medicine, and magic happens. So please don't sit with people who put on a playlist and think that's the same thing, because ayahuasca can't drive a playlist, right? And she's a DJ. She tells us what songs to sing and how to sing them. Sometimes I open my mouth to sing a song that I've sang hundreds of times and it comes out totally different because the vibration needs to be different. Maybe it's a strong song that she wants as a lullaby because that's what the space needs. She can't imprint that energy into the space when it's a playlist. So the playlists kind of drive me batty that people are doing entire ceremonies with that, because there's no present, real time energy of the medicine getting to drive the potency of the songs, the music, because it's all pre-scheduled. So yeah, the icaros are magical.
Actually, that brings me to just one more that has to do with the icaros. Doctoring. What is that? And obviously it's something that has nothing to do with a playlist.
Yes, correct. The playlist can't doctor. So doctoring, or limpias, as we call them, it's mainly a Shipibo Canibo tradition of rewiring the energy field of the individual. So I'm sitting on this tapestry, which is classic ayahuasca symbolism of the interconnectivity of all things, but it also represents the energy grid that all beings have, spaces. You can look at the tiniest part of the grid, which is maybe on one small element of our body, all the way up to the grid of the entire multiverse, right? And doctoring reweaves the parts of our energy grid that are traumatized, that maybe have blockages. The way that we see it when we work with the medicine is we can see where basically there's no color, where there's disruptions in the pattern of somebody's grid. And so some of the songs are doctoring songs that literally go in and reweave that energy to basically bring in new life force, to bring vitality and color where there's been pain and trauma and shutdown. So it's part of the magic of the combination of the icaros and the medicine and the individual's willingness to heal, to let go. Because sometimes we hold tight to our traumas because they're so familiar. We don't know who we are without them. When you have the courage to say, take me, being vulnerable and open, we can have access with those songs. And I see the reweaving, and it's life-changing, to be able to release maybe even lineage trauma. It's not even just personal stuff that's happened in our lives. It can be the trauma that's passed down from generation to generation that creates that distortion. So the limpias, the doctoring, is a really special part of just a handful of tribes that do this kind of work, but it's my personal favorite to receive and to get to be a part of in terms of co-creating that magic.
When you say ancestral, would you say that it's possible that somebody could be dealing with, say, alcoholism or an addiction, and it actually is the DNA or the imprint of their grandfather, their great grandfather, and they're just experiencing it? It's really not them.
100%. In my own relationship with alcohol, my father went through alcoholism, 2 of my brothers. It's hard to find a family line where there isn't alcoholism, right? And I, in my teen years, was like, I'm not falling for that. I'm not going to be an alcoholic. And I didn't actually really start drinking until I was 24. And it just took over, almost overnight. And for me, it makes sense. It sort of justifies the power that alcoholism had over me to understand it was in my DNA, physically, spiritually, like long line of alcoholics in both sides of my family. So yeah, of course we carry these things. If we're genetically predisposed to cancer, Alzheimer's, etc., why wouldn't we be to things, addictions, etc., like, and traumas that we carry, you know? For example, sometimes we feel as though we carry sexual abuse, but we may not have the story to point to it, but our mothers or our grandmothers might. And if they didn't get a chance to heal that in their lifetimes, it's in us too. So yeah, ancestral healing is absolutely a thing.
In your own words, what is shadow work?
Ooh. So shadow work, in a very general, broad statement, is going into whatever is unconscious. It's making the unconscious conscious. It's important, I think, to emphasize that shadow work is not just going into repressed or latent anger, depression, etc. It's also where the potentiality of our gifts and our talents lives. So Carl Jung called that the golden shadow, the potentiality of us to be in our superhero powers. So and it's important to remind ourselves of that, because sometimes shadow work can feel so heavy and feel like, oh God, so I have to go back into my shadow and find these things that are very difficult to process, which is always worth it, by the way, even if it's difficult, but it doesn't always have to be, because sometimes we go into our shadow via plant medicine, meditation, all the different ways that we expand our consciousness. And we find like, wow, I haven't realized my potential as a messenger, or whatever special gifts that we have that have just been kind of hiding in the recesses of our psyche. So shadow work is just the act of expanding our consciousness, our awareness.
Some people seem to, when they're doing their shadow work, or even just experiencing triggers, and then approaching those triggers like shadow work, get themselves into a really stuck place, maybe for weeks, maybe for months, and end up with little energy for day-to-day life. But then when they come out of it, kind of like you're saying, they come out with that golden shadow, they come out with some kind of gifts. Can you tell us another story about how that has happened for you?
Oh, yeah, I'll go to something really personal. Probably the toughest dark night of the soul I've ever had was last year. I got arrested for ayahuasca, got thrown in jail. And I spiraled into victim consciousness of like, first of all, how dare you plant, not protect me. And also just rage at the system that, because I think a lot of us doing this work, we had imprinted in us, speaking of lineage, ancestry, the memory of being persecuted time and time again for standing for spirit, relationship with the planet, like anything that's beyond the limitations of the mind, right? And so that ignited getting thrown in jail, getting basically treated like a criminal when I've been trying to help people, really truly coming from a good place, and not having the system recognize or understand that. I knew when it happened that there was something magical that was going to come from it, but it's so hard to trust when you're like they threatened me with 40 years in prison. And I had a 4-month process, legal process, ended up just getting a year probation. Everything's okay. But boy, did that test my trust in the process of going into the darkness, because it's the deepest I went into a space of just like complete annihilation, victim consciousness. But what has been rebirthing as a result of that journey is, you speak of resilience. I'm a badass. Like, I know what I'm made of now. I know I can handle that. I also know that all of my heroes went to jail for their causes, and that it is now something I look at more as an honor, a privilege, rather than being abused. Now, of course, I only spent a few days in jail, and I'm really blessed from all of that. But what is being rebirthed is just a deeper trust in the breakthrough process, through experience, and trust in myself to handle it, to handle when the curveballs come. Because there's a quote that John Lewis, who was a civil rights pioneer, said when he got arrested, is, "I'm on the wrong side of the law, but the right side of history." And I felt that of well, there's so millions of us over the decades, the generations have to be persecuted in order for the system to change for the greater good. And I'm just one of many that has walked that path. And it helped me to reframe what happened in a space of gratitude rather than feeling like a victim. And that's the hardest alchemy I've ever done, because I still get mad at the system when I think about that stress and fear and how dare it's so draconian, it's so cruel. But it happens to people every day. And so I'm not unique in that. That was the biggest breakthrough I've had. And I think I'm still integrating the gifts of what's come through the other side, because it was in August of last year that I finally got probation and was basically, most of the stress lifted from there. But there's an example of working with the darkness.
Wow. I really don't know what to say, but thank you. Thank you for sharing that, but thank you for your piece in all that. While you were really in it, what resources did you turn to?
In jail, it was interesting because I didn't have my altar. I didn't have my tools. I didn't have anything. That door was locked in a brick cell, and I had to go within. I had to find it inside of me. So one and only time I've ever been in that situation where I couldn't go to nature. I couldn't externalize my relationship with the reminders that everything's okay. So the first day that I got thrown in, I went down the deepest pit of fear, rage, all of it I think I've ever experienced. And then it was festering in me like a poison. I'm like, okay, I gotta do something. And coincidentally, the next morning I had 2 cellmates. They had to go to court. And I got lost in the system because I had no previous criminal history. So I had the cell to myself. And I'm like, what am I gonna do? I sang icaros, sang to the medicines, sang to the plants, and totally transformed the energy of my internal space and external space. Just singing and singing. I'm like, there it is. There it is. And you know what I realized is that freedom is an inside job. It really is. I felt so liberated in those next 2 days, even though I was locked in this teeny tiny cell, witnessing really horrendous suffering and abuse, but not falling for it in my internal space, and just knowing that I got this, that even if I'm kidnapped by terrorists, they can't have it, what I have worked so hard to cultivate. And that's where I'm really grateful for the experience, because without, being thrown in jail, I would not have dug deep inside of me to find that it's always there, and it's not conditional, it's not circumstantial. So, I had to practice all of the things that the plants have been teaching me for almost 20 years. And thank goodness, I found it. It was in there.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you for asking.
Just in these last moments that we have together, because you're a death doula and you help people in their last phase of life, I wanted to shift over and ask you some questions about that topic too. Well, just first, what are some of the ways that you do help people in a spiritual sense get ready to transition?
So there's an expression that I love, that as the body gets weaker, the spirit gets stronger. What happens most of the time, if we're in hospital settings or whatever, hospice, there's such an emphasis around what is dying that we don't highlight with our awareness what is being born, this spiritual expansion. So that's my job right there. And it's very personal for every person. Typically I get to work with the person before they're really in that, basically 1 foot in each world space. And I like to just ask a lot of questions around their spiritual beliefs, like what do they think is going to happen? Because it's not up to any of us to impart our beliefs on each other. Everybody's got some beliefs. And to invite them into feeling into what's changing in a conscious way. And almost always, when I ask those questions, the individual is able to go, yeah, wait a second, something is growing, something is expanding. Our loved ones don't ask that. Doctors don't ask that. They're just trying to keep the body alive. They're not talking to the spirit of like, what's happening there? So that's the core, I think, of what a death doula does, is where we're birthing the spirit. Ironically, it's not about a death. It's the spirit transitioning. I think birth is way harder than death, actually. Birth is much bigger of a trauma. And we come in and it's so messy and intense. Death can be really beautiful. It's hard for the body, everything's shutting down, but that spirit is getting his or her wings back. And there's something so magical about that, but we got to emphasize it. We got to highlight it and let the individual who's transitioning give language to it and have more of a conscious experience of it, of like, yeah, wait, something's shifting. And yeah, it's magical. It's beautiful. No matter what they believe is going to happen in the aftermath, to feel that something is not dying, something is actually being born. That's what we do.
Okay. What would you say to somebody who has experienced organized religion and has a really strong fear of hell?
Well, what my teacher would say is that heaven and hell are states of consciousness. They're not destinations. Yeah. And if you've ever gone through a dark night of the soul, you've been to hell. You've already been there. You know it. You've had your passport stamped, as I like to say. My passport has got lots of stamps from hell. Customs in hell is really used to me. It's like, oh, hey, Kat, welcome back. We're just passing through. So death to me is a lot like life. Anything can happen, but we're handling the curveballs of life, right? Losing people, going to jail, all of the crazy things that create an experience of what we define as hell. So maybe death will bring another curveball experience, but the darkness, remember, is temporary. And it's there to teach us and to expand us. And if we have a fundamental trust in the relationship of that energy, hell, well, as ayahuasca likes to say, if you can walk through hell with a smile on your face, everything is heaven. If we learn just to be like, oh, well, it's my turn to go through the darkness, I got this, I believe in myself, the strength of my spirit, it's not fun to go through those places of darkness, but it's never permanent. And it's always there to teach us. So you'll just be passing through. My experience is that, we don't go to hell or heaven for that matter. We get to have a life review. We get to really look at what it is that we did here. And we're not punished for it, but we might have to feel some emotions that we didn't want to feel while we were here. But heaven and hell, I love the expression. They're states of consciousness, not physical destinations. We can handle all of it.
If a person found themselves either in plant medicine ceremony, deep meditation, or after transitioning, passing through one of these hell realms or bardos, if they could hold on to one practice to prepare them, what would you tell them to do?
Those remembering the lies that the darkness tells us. Because there's a Winston Churchill quote that if you're going through hell, just keep going. Of like, okay, I'm passing through. It is when we contract in those experiences and we think, now I've done it. I've had this many times. I drank this crazy Amazon brew and I'm totally in hell and my mind is broken. My brain is broken. It's been thrown into a blender. I'm never going to feel normal again. This is it. I've done it. It's never true. But believing that elongates and intensifies the experience of the darkness. So if we could stop falling for those lies, it doesn't change the vibration of the energy as we're transitioning through it. But what it does is it gives spaciousness. If like we go from going, I'm a victim to this, to like, I got this, just passing through. And it makes all the difference because the suffering is in the resistance to what's happening, not the energy itself. So if we can stop resisting it, that's why I was mentioning curiosity, leaning in, of like, how could I work with this? Then we can pass through much more quickly instead of contracting into the resistance and making things a gazillion times harder for ourselves. That's the biggest piece, I think.
You know, that sounds doable. That sounds doable.
We can do this. Yeah.
Yeah. If someone has a loved one who's died and they're really struggling to feel confident about their loved one existing outside of the body, just because maybe they're an atheist or something like that, what would you share with those who are left behind?
There's an expression that came to me from a plant that I worked with in a deep way once, where she said, there's only one thing that dies in the multiverse. One thing. It's like, what's that? Resistance. So recognizing that we can't feel the beings that are connected to us because we're resisting it, because of a belief, because of a fear of maybe, what if it's not true? Like, that's why shadow working, healing, is not just about our own personal well-being, it's about our interconnection to everyone and everything. Because as we heal each trauma, each blockage, we can feel more and more of course we're connected. And that's one of the things altered states of consciousness are really amazing about, making abundantly obvious. You work with mushrooms or Aya, and it's like, yes, it is obvious, everything is connected. But if we can't feel that, it's because we're hurting. It's because there's something that needs to be healed. And so to focus on that rather than, the external, like, where is my loved one? Where are they? Of like, what in me needs to be healed in order for me to feel them? Because they're there. They're there. It's just hard for them to get our attention when we're disconnected. And it usually happens, that reconnection, in ways that we don't expect. When we're chasing after it, it's really hard to manifest. But when we're doing our own healing, spending time every day just checking in, it can just manifest like magic, of like, I can feel my father. I know they're there. And a lot of it comes down to also trusting what we feel is true without needing some tangible evidence that satisfies the ego. Sometimes that happens. I mean, my dad turned on a light from my mom after he died because she needed validation. And so he went and turned on her bedside table lamp. And that was her thing. She was like, your dad's here. He turned on the lamp. I'm like, yeah, I bet that was really hard for him. Can you just trust now that he's there and like you're connected? And she does. She doesn't need that tangible evidence anymore. But if we can trust that what we feel is true, when we feel them there, we sometimes like, I hear people say, well, I think I heard what my father used to say to me. I'm like, that's what your father's saying right now. It's because it didn't remind you of him. It's because he's right there going, hey, I'm trying to help. So just to trust that more. We get so caught up in wanting it to be tangible in the way that the mind understands, but intelligence is way beyond that. But it's about our healing first and foremost.
Yeah. A lot of people who are in a hard place where they feel like their old traumas are coming up over and over, they're facing their fears over and over, and just going through general inadequacy in this whole process. How would you say that people who are in that might actually be great candidates for becoming healers one day?
Personal experience is credible to those who are looking for assurance that healing is possible. The best shamans, healers, therapists, space holders have been through hell. I don't trust anyone to hold space for me that's just been like, yeah, it's all been good, light and love. Like, no, show me your passport stamped in hell so that I can trust you're credible. for holding that space, because it's only through experience of those energies that we become credible to hold space for others. Again, you can't read about a dark night of the soul in the book and know what it feels like, right? Doesn't work. So that's one of the, I love that you asked this question, because it's one of the things that is most motivating when we're moving through a challenging time, is also realizing that when we crack this code, we can pay it forward. You know, I have a lot of clients with eating disorders. I love being able to be a light at the end of the tunnel of like, yeah, went through it, know how horrible it is, also know that it's possible to get to the other side, and to be, and I'm credible because I lived it. So it is super motivating to know that, as I move through this, I can help other people in whatever capacity we're all called to do it. Because yeah, we got to experience these things in order to really be able to impart the truth of what is possible to other people.
That's really encouraging. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think those are all my questions. Unless you have anything else that you just feel like you want to drop on us before we go, any messages from the plants in the last while of working with them for where we're at on the planet right now? Any encouragement to any of the viewers?
Yeah, there's one core thing that I just want to ground in. We've touched on it many times today, but like the most healing thing that we do is the way that we take care of ourselves and show up for ourselves. And I know everybody out there has super busy lives, and the promises we keep to ourselves are often the first promises that we break. You know, when life happens and there's so many distractions and intensities. So I just implore everybody to put themselves first in a daily practice. And it doesn't have to take hours. Like I sit at my altar at least 15 minutes every morning, checking in. How you feeling, kiddo? What's happening? Asking my body, what do you need today? Just like taking the time to lay the foundation for the day that just reflects that I'm showing up for myself. And because of that practice, I have the capacity to show up for other people. It's that old, like very overused, but very appropriate metaphor of put on your own mask before helping others. Like, please, everybody, if we did that for ourselves, we would live in a different world. We would be kinder to each other and the planet, because we're giving ourselves what we need rather than, you know, looking for it externally. And it often doesn't exist in that way. So treating ourselves like the gods and goddesses that we are is the most powerful healing thing that we can do.
Okay, thank you. Where can people find you if they want to find out more about the services that you offer?
Thanks for asking. So yeah, my company is called Plant Medicine People, plantmedicinepeople.com. And you can find some of my writing there, coaching opportunities, courses that I teach around relationship with plants. And then I mentioned I'm also the afterlife coach. And so afterlife.coach is my personal website.
Okay. And I will share that in the description. I'll share your links down there. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
Amanda, thank you for having me. Wonderful conversation.